Because the difference between a quick, merciful death and an absolute nightmare, one that stretches into seconds of conscious agony, comes down to a single question. Can this man actually aim? They force you down onto your knees. The rough wood of the execution block is cold and hard beneath your chin. You stretch your neck out, exposed, vulnerable. Your pulse is hammering so loudly you can almost hear it over the jeering crowd. Then you hear it, the executioner lifting the axe, the slow, metallic scrape of iron being raised above his head. And then the sound that will be the last thing you ever process, the long, whistling whoosh of a massive blade cutting through air, coming down toward your neck at terrifying speed. Oh, hey there. Before we talk about what just happened to your spinal cord, your blood vessels, your brain stem, and the very real and scientifically debated question of whether your head stays conscious for a few seconds after it rolls away from your body, let's play a quick game. I'm going to say some myths about decapitation, and you tell me, true or false. Ready? Let's go. Myth 1. When your head gets cut off, you die instantly. True or false? Complicated. And that answer is probably more unsettling than a simple false would be. Your brain doesn't die the instant the blade severs your neck. It takes approximately 10 to 15 seconds for your brain to exhaust its remaining supply of oxygenated blood and begin to shut down. Now, whether you are actually conscious, whether there's a you experiencing anything during those 10 to 15 seconds is a question that has been debated by scientists, philosophers, and horrified historians for centuries. But here's what we know for certain. Your brain is still metabolically active. Neurons are still firing. Electrical signals are still moving through your gray matter for a brief window after your head is no longer attached to your body. Instantly? No, not instantly. Myth 2. A sharp blade and a strong swing means you don't feel anything. True or false? Mostly true. And the mostly is doing a lot of work there. If the executioner is skilled, if his blade is properly sharpened, and if his aim is accurate, the cut happens in a fraction of a second, so fast that your pain receptors in the neck don't have time to send distress signals up through your nervous system before your spinal cord is completely severed. Once the spinal cord is cut, no signals travel anywhere, pain included. The problem, and this is a very significant problem, is that phrase, if the executioner knows what he's doing. In medieval times, that was an enormous, heavily loaded if. Executioners were frequently undertrained. Sometimes they were drunk. Sometimes their axe hadn't been properly sharpened in weeks. Sometimes they were simply nervous, because chopping someone's head off is not, it turns out, a skill that comes naturally to most human beings. And when the executioner doesn't know what he's doing, then myth 2 becomes very, terrifyingly false. Myth 3. Your head can stay conscious long enough to see your own body after it's separated. True or false? Probably false. But also, and this is the part that genuinely disturbs historians and neuroscientists alike, maybe, there are documented historical accounts from the French Revolution and other periods of executed heads that appeared to blink when their names were called. Eyes that tracked movement. Lips that seemed to move, as if forming words, for a few seconds after separation. Now, were those conscious actions? Was there a functioning awareness inside that severed head, looking out, trying to communicate? Or were those just the final involuntary muscle spasms and nerve misfires of a dying brain? We genuinely don't know. We can't know, for reasons we'll get to. But the accounts exist, and they are disturbing either way. Alright, now let's get into the actual, physiological, deeply unsettling reality of what happens when a medieval executioner attempts to separate your head from your body with one swing of a large metal blade. And first, a fascinating historical footnote. Anne Boleyn, the second wife of King Henry VIII, was so aware of how badly beheadings could go wrong that she specifically requested a skilled swordsman be brought from France for her execution. She had witnessed botched beheadings before, multiple swings, prolonged suffering, absolute horror, and she was determined that hers would be clean. It worked. One swing, one clean cut, dead before she could register what had happened. The lesson? If you're ever getting executed in medieval Europe, spend the money on a good executioner. It is, quite literally, the most important hiring decision of your life. So, what actually happens when your head gets separated from your body? Let's start with what a clean decapitation actually requires, because it's more complicated than people imagine. Your neck is not just soft tissue. It contains your spinal cord, the central highway of your entire nervous system, connecting your brain to every single part of your body, protected and surrounded by 7 cervical vertebrae. These are bones. Hard, dense bones. Your neck also contains major arteries and veins carrying blood at pressure, layers of muscle, tendons, ligaments, your trachea, your esophagus, and an intricate network of nerves. To decapitate someone, you need to sever all of that simultaneously in one motion, with enough force and precision that everything separates cleanly. The blade must cut through skin, muscle, cartilage, bone, and spinal cord in a single downward arc. If the executioner hits the right spot, the gap between the 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae, where there's a natural space between the bones, the blade encounters less resistance. It takes a fraction of a second. Everything severs. Clean. But what does clean actually mean for your body? The moment the spinal cord is severed, all communication between your brain and your body stops. Completely. Immediately. Your brain can no longer send signals to your heart, your lungs, your limbs, anything. Your heart may continue beating for a few additional seconds because it has its own internal electrical pacemaker system and doesn't strictly require moment-to-moment commands from the brain to maintain its rhythm. But without central nervous system support, it stops quickly. Your lungs stop expanding because the diaphragm and intercostal muscles that drive breathing are controlled by signals from the brainstem, signals that can no longer travel anywhere. And your head? Your severed head still contains oxygenated blood in its vessels and tissues. Enough, potentially, for 10 to 15 seconds of continued brain activity. This is where things get philosophically disturbing. During those 10 to 15 seconds, your neurons are still firing. Your brain hasn't been destroyed, it's been disconnected and deprived. There's a meaningful difference. A destroyed brain stops immediately. A deprived brain winds down. The question of whether there's conscious experience during that wind-down period is something scientists cannot definitively answer because ethical constraints prevent any direct study of the phenomenon in humans. Animal studies, particularly involving rats, have shown measurable brain activity persisting for several seconds after decapitation. But translating that to human conscious experience involves assumptions we simply can't verify. What we do have are historical accounts. During the French Revolution, when the guillotine was executing dozens of people per day, observers reported multiple incidents of severed heads showing apparent responsiveness. Eyes opening and closing, eyes moving as if tracking objects, facial muscles twitching into what looked like expressions, lips moving. In at least one famous account, a head was said to have shown visible agitation when slapped on the cheek. Were these conscious responses? Were they reflexes? Were the observers projecting meaning onto random nerve discharge? We don't know. We likely never will. Now let's walk through the timeline, second by second. Assuming this is a clean execution, a skilled executioner, a properly sharpened blade, good aim. Second 0. The axe comes down. It's moving at significant velocity. An experienced executioner can swing a heavy blade with enough force to generate substantial kinetic energy. The blade makes contact with your neck at the 4th and 5th cervical vertebrae. The cut happens in a small fraction of a second. The physical sensation is complicated. On one hand, if the blade is sharp enough and moving fast enough, the nerve signals from your neck never reach your brain before the spinal cord itself is severed. In theory, you don't feel it as pain. On the other hand, your brain is registering something. A massive pressure event. An overwhelming physical shock. Something has gone catastrophically, terminally wrong with your body. Whether that registers as pain in the classical sense or as something else, some overwhelming, beyond language experience of total physical catastrophe, is a question neuroscience cannot fully answer. Your head separates. It falls forward off the block or is caught by an assistant. Your body slumps. Blood, a significant amount of blood, under pressure from your heart's final contractions, spurts from the severed vessels. This is why medieval execution blocks had channels carved into them. The blood had to go somewhere. Seconds 1 through 5. Your brain still has oxygen. Neurons are firing. If consciousness exists anywhere in this window, it likely exists right here. What might you be experiencing? Probably overwhelming disorientation. Your visual field might still be processing images because your eyes and visual cortex still have the oxygen they need to function. You might see movement. light, the sky, or the crowd spinning as your head rolls or falls. But you cannot breathe. Your lungs are on your body, not your head. You cannot move. There are no muscles attached to your will. You cannot speak. Speech requires air moving through vocal cords that are no longer connected to any air supply. If you are conscious, you are locked inside a dying object, completely unable to act, completely unable to communicate, watching the world from an increasingly impossible angle. The facial expressions reported on severed heads in historical accounts, eyes wide open, mouths slightly agape, frozen into expressions that looked like shock or confusion, may be exactly that. Or they may be muscles that happened to contract in that configuration during the final nerve discharges. No one can tell the difference from the outside. That ambiguity is the horror. Seconds 5 through 15. The oxygen is running out now. Neurons begin failing as energy reserves drop. Your visual field goes dark, not because your eyes are closing, but because your visual cortex no longer has the power to process incoming signals. Sound fades. Whatever awareness may have existed is fragmenting, dissolving. Not like falling asleep. More like someone dismantling your consciousness one system at a time, flipping off switches in the dark. Brain cells are dying now. Electrical activity drops towards zero. Any awareness that existed is gone. What remains is just random nerve discharge, meaningless noise in a failing system. Twitches and reflexes that look like something but mean nothing. Total time from blade to brain death, 10 to 15 seconds. The good news? You almost certainly live somewhere judicial beheading isn't a concern. But if you ever do find yourself in that position, take Anne Boleyn's advice. Hire the professional. Like and subscribe. Stay safe. Keep your head on.